Dude, what the crap's going on? HeirofCarthage here with kind of a tips and trick video, I guess. It's not really a trick, this is just more of a tip. So, you see a lot of vampire armies nowadays, and those armies, it's pretty popular to be fielding Hex Wraiths, because the Hex Wraiths are really good at tanking physical damage. Physical damage is done by any unit that's not using either one, a magical weapon, or two, a spell to do the damage. So the Hex Wraiths ignore, I want to say it's 75 or 80% of that damage. We'll go try and look at that. So that's one thing that makes the vampires very powerful, is that when you see these death blobs, or even just a vampire army that's not a blob, they'll use the Wraiths to help tank damage from units, where those units aren't able to inflict the magical damage. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the units that have magical damage, but this is really focused on one thing. So I've seen a lot of complaints on the forums about the spell Gork's Foot. And let's go take a look at this actually real quick. So Gork's Foot is a spell in the lore of the Big Wa. So if we take a look at it, it's right here, Foot of Gork, sorry. It takes 15 mana, which is a lot, and you can upgrade it and it increases the damage. It doesn't say anything about the tooltip. You get an increased miscast chance, so it's 50%. You can see here it knocks people everywhere. It causes magical damage, and honestly, the results of the spell are, other than the disruption, extremely underwhelming when you use it on pretty much every unit in the game. And a lot of people are upset because it takes half of your mana, 15 if you have a full mana thing. It takes 24-second cooldown. It says strong and long-lasting effects, but I mean it is a pretty large strike area, blah blah blah. So, but that's the thing, is when you use it against just a standard unit, it doesn't do a lot of damage. But because the damage is all magical, there's two things that combine to make a pretty interesting situation. Hex Wraiths have low hit points because they ignore most physical damage, which is right here, yeah. So they have 80% physical resistance, so for that reason, their hit points have been adjusted all the way down to 2400, where say a unit like these Cryptors is all the way up at 5760. And again, Hex Wraiths they ignore 80% of standard damage. They don't ignore 80% of magical damage. They don't ignore any of it. So magical damage is kind of like the equivalent of armor piercing to an ethereal unit, like this. So I mean, they have no armor because they're not real. So let's go check out some replays. I want to show you a couple of scenarios, and this is not in an actual battle, but I should be able to explain to you kind of what to expect. So does this mean the Greenskins are now the one-stop shop for destroying the vampires? No. But I do believe that there's going to be some interesting results here that you're going to find pretty amusing. So the vampires here have spent considerably more on their army than I have, because I've just got these 3 spearmen. I've got 2 orc shamans. Really, 1 would have been fine for the test here. I just brought 2 in case I wanted to cast the spell quickly, and then I've got Grimgor supporting my men. So we're going to fast forward for a second. The Hex Wraiths are approaching, so there's 6 units of Hex Wraiths here versus 4 goblins, 2 orc shamans, and Grimgor. So in any standard conditions, unless Grimgor just kills the enemy lord, there's going to be no chance here whatsoever. So I want you all to see this. So I have targeted a Foot of Gork, and there are 2 Wraith units already blobbed up right here, and the AI is blobbing in a 3rd unit. I want you to watch the effects of this spell. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you one thing real quick before this happens. The more blobbed the ethereal units are, the better this is going to turn out. The Foot of Gork, although it shows kind of like this wide area of effect, in all reality, from what I tested, the more blobbed up you get these units, you can do ridiculous damage, and I mean ridiculous. So watch this. Okay, I'm going to put it in slow motion. All the Wraiths blob perfectly right where I want them. Here comes the actual Foot. So here's Gork raising his mighty foot, and stomp. So you can see the visual effects are quite stunning, but just how much damage did we do? I mean, look at the crater in the Wraiths there. Now, of course, it damages my own men rather badly, but I mean, just look at this right here. The amount of damage on those Wraiths. So how much was it? How much damage did we do? So look at the Wraiths. This unit is down to 171 with only 8 models remaining. This one's 10 models remaining with 295. This one's 115 with only 6 models remaining. The total kills, this Orc Shaman in one single spell, because the AI blobbed up, just got 110 Wraith kills. That is over 2 units, full units of Wraiths, and almost the third completely dead. Now, what happened here? They were blobbed up, so it allowed the Orc Shaman to get the best possible scenario. But so like the Death Blob, for instance, the Death Star, and look at this Orc Shaman. He only gets to stomp on 1 unit, but they were rather blobbed up in one spot, but still he picks up 35 Wraith kills. So is 35 Wraith kills worth half your mana? And in this case, 110? Absolutely, in my mind, when it comes to a vampire army, because if you take away these ethereal units, these guys are tanking most of the physical resistance from your troops, and killing those units allows you to take down their Cryptors. So I definitely think that there's potential for Foot of Gork to be devastating. Now that said, be aware that if you pick the Greenskins, the vampire player might know that you're going to try and pull Foot of Gork out, and they might be better off just bringing something like Graveguard, and they might just leave the Karen Wraiths behind. But you can see here, absolutely no problem for this little army I had set up to mop up 6 units of Karen Wraiths in almost no time, and then Grimgor, of course, mopping up the enemy general very easily. So interesting scenario, because remember, if someone does bring the Vampire Death Star, or an army that is meant to be supported by the Invocation into Heck, they can't afford to Spirit Leech you. So bringing Grimgor gives them a choice. They can either try and Spirit Leech Grimgor, and then that will take away their mana for Invocation to Heck, which is actually a good thing for you, especially if you're going to use the Foot of Gork, because they won't be able to heal these Cairn Wraiths when they take massive damage. And if they can't kill Grimgor, then Grimgor can tank massive damage, and he can potentially get in there and kill enemy lords and cause a lot of problems. So this is one scenario, though. So this is an ideal scenario with nothing but Wraiths on the field, and get them very blobbed up. So in a very blobbed up scenario, 110 kills from one cast. That was not the overpowered version of Foot of Gork, and to be honest, I'm not seeing a whole big lot of benefit when you overcast the Foot of Gork. Even though it says increased damage, I find that it's better to just do the standard cast. It saves you 4 mana, so it's 15 mana versus 19 on the overcast, and you're better off to do it that way. Let's take a look at another video. So does this work equally well whenever it's being used on Hex Wraiths, which are a mounted Wraith unit that you will sometimes see the vampires field? So this mounted Hex Wraith unit, or the mounted Wraiths, the Hex Wraiths, they are a 1,500 gold unit, so very expensive. So again, it takes 13 mana, I think, to cost Fate of Buna, which pretty much kills units like Demigryph Knights and Knights of the Realm, Empire Knights, Grail Knights. All these other ones really do bad there. So for only 2 more mana, you have the option to cast this against, say, a Hex Wraith. And Hex Wraiths are units that you don't see every time against a vampire army, but you are seeing them fairly frequent, because again, they can tank 80% physical damage and then get support from other vampire units to help take out enemy cavalry. So here you're going to see the Hex Wraiths charging into my Goblin Spearmen, and once again I'm going to wait for them to get maximally blobbed up, and that is achieved here. So I've got both units as blobbed up as they're going to get, and I'm going to bring in the Foot of Gork here. Let's do it in real time so y'all can see what this looks like. Her stomp. So just how effective is the Foot of Gork versus a Hex Wraith? There is only, let's see, so the Hex Wraiths have only 12 models remaining, and they started with about 2,800 hit points. They are down to 295, and there was 32 kills for the Orc Shaman against a unit that costs 1,500 gold, so extremely effective versus the Hex Wraiths as well. So it is not just applicable to the Cairn Wraiths. So the Foot of Gork, if a Hex Wraith gets engaged, you can go ahead and drop the Foot of Gork, and it will have extremely good effects versus the engaged unit. So there's a couple, again, just a couple of things worth mentioning. If the enemy unit is not engaged, do not use the Foot of Gork. It's very hard to hit them because it has a 5-second run-up time, and if the unit is moving and you don't connect with them, the damage dealt will be far less. It doesn't matter if their whole unit is even within that outer circle on the spell. You want as many units as close to that inner circle as possible, so the spell works best when you get the unit fixed in position. So what happens in a more realistic type scenario where the vampires are using mixed units? So I set up an equal teeth smashing scenario, meaning that I've spent just as many teeth as my opponent. So there was 4,800 gold left for the vampires, and there was 4,800 gold left for me. And I've set up this scenario. So Orc Biggins would be a more logical pick versus this because they have a bonus versus large, and Cryptors are the natural companion for Hex Wraiths. The Cryptors dish poison damage and high amounts of damage, while the Cairn Wraiths tank the physical damage. I am not going to be able to get the AI to act exactly like a player here. So, and again, I can't get the AI to form a Death Star, so I'll have to try and test this against that when I get the chance. But again, I don't want this to be just testing against the Death Star. I want it to be whether or not this is viable against any vampire strategy that involves ethereal units. And to be quite frank, I find that it really is. The Foot of Gork is a viable spell anytime a vampire army is facing you and going to bring Hex Wraiths. And we'll talk about a few other things to be aware of. So here, I'm going to drop a Foot of Gork right here. So here comes the Foot onto the Cairn Wraiths. Let's observe the damage. So there was 2 Cairn Wraiths bunched up in the middle of some Cryptors. The effect on the Cryptors is minimal. They start off with about like 5,500 or 5,700 health. They're only down at 47, so it does some damage to them, but because they have so much hit points, it's relatively minimal. And remember that you don't really get a lot of AP with the Foot of Gork, so I mean, if a unit has higher armor, it won't do anything. But look at this, down to 12 models on the Wraith, so a lot of kills there, and killed over half, or not quite half of this unit, but almost half of the models in this unit, and far over half of their health. So from that one spell on the Orc Shaman back here, 54 kills whenever it hit this blob mostly, and some of it carried over into the other units. So again, not an overcast in any case. So you see this fight here was definitely heavily stacked in the favor of the vampires, and right there I removed an entire Cairn Wraith unit and most of another. There was another time, which I didn't get the replay saved, where the vampires did use Invocation of Nehek, and it did save their Wraith unit right after the Foot of Gork hit it, but their Wraith unit was badly damaged even after the Invocation of Nehek came in. It did not heal it all the way, so it did a lot of damage. Here we're going to use it one last time, so I want this scenario to fight all the way out. So here comes another Foot of Gork. At least I thought it was. There's going to be another one inbound here in just a second, so give it just a minute. Maybe I'm waiting on my mana to build up. Okay, they did use Invocation of Nehek up here on this one unit, but it wasn't overcast. I don't know why they used it on that Cairn Wraith unit, because it wasn't actually attacked. Okay, I have enough mana for another Foot of Gork now, and I believe it's incoming. Basically, you'll see that the Cryptors are now suffering against my Orc Biggins, being supported by Grimgor. And again, we're going to assume in this scenario the vampires are trying to use Invocation of the Hex, so they're not using Spirit Leech on Grimgor. Here comes the second Foot of Gork. See how blobbed up this Cairn Wraith unit is? Yes. So the Cairn Wraiths get absolutely obliterated by the Foot of Gork. And usually if you get this put in there well, the guys get damaged so bad that unless the Invocation of Nehek is active, it's too late. And because the unit will take so much damage that they disintegrate. So it becomes pretty helpful in that way. And you can see at this point that I'm going to have enough Biggins, along with the help of Grimgor, to actually clean up the remainder of the units on the battlefield. So again, not exactly, and Invocation of Nehek was used a couple of times, not on an overcast basis by the AI, but it wasn't enough to save some of their units. And again, this was equal money spent between both, and if you think about it here, I really didn't need 2 Orc Shamans. So I could have saved some money and had pretty much equal spend and still had a unit of cavalry in here too. So you bring some boar boys and stuff into this fight too, and I think all of a sudden you have even more potential here for the Greenskins to do a lot of damage. And not just boar boys, you've also got Doom Divers. Doom Divers cause a lot of damage to blobbed up units, and if there's a Death Star and the Doom Divers get the hit out of it, and then you follow that up with a big old giant Foot of Gork stomping, I mean, I definitely could see this being a viable counter to the Vampire Death Star. I haven't gotten to test it just outright, But so there you go. A little bit of the tip and trick around the Foot of Gork. What is it good for? It's really good for wraith stomping. That's going to be just about the only thing the Foot of Gork is good for, is wraith stomping. The rest of the magic in the Big Wog, this is worth looking at. So what would the rest of the magic do if you needed to use it, and say you picked it and there wasn't any wraiths in the vampire army? Could it still be helpful to you? So let's take a look. So this is all the magic you're going to get in the Big Wog. Here we go is actually pretty helpful because it gives 58 melee attack to all the units within the area of effect, and it gives them that for 35 seconds. That is a long time. So using this Here we go, so let's say that the vampires don't bring any wraiths. You can cast this on a blob of infantry, and your guys are going to get an additional 58 melee attack, which will kind of undo the poisoning effect from the Cryptors for a 35-second period. And if you have a bonus versus large plus all this melee attack, you're going to be doing some considerable damage. You have Fist of Gork. This one cost 8 mana. This one was 11 mana, by the way. It only affects one unit, and it cannot be overcast. But that one unit gets additional melee attack, defense, and extra weapon damage. Brain Bursta, I've tried this on multiple units, and I just do not see Brain Bursta doing hardly any damage. It only costs 5 mana. This spell is going to be better used for disrupting an enemy charge as opposed to actually really doing damage. Edbutt, I haven't really gotten to test this. It's a breath spell. We might be able to test it here in just a second. And then you got Gaze of Mork is a magic missile spell. This would be something that you wanted to use, to try and general snipe pretty much. So if there's a flying lord on the other side, you could use this one. It has poor penetration, but I mean it does, again, it's magical damage and stuff like that. So, and then when you overcast it, it's an extended cast range. So that's a 400-meter range spell. So that could be potentially useful, though that one magic missile is going to cost you 10 mana if you upgrade it. And the Foot of Gork, again, I never saw, it does say increased damage, but nothing I saw in my test seemed to make it worth it. I suggest us doing it standard. Let's do one last quick test, and let's see if we can use the let's see if we can use that breath spell with the Orc Shaman, and we'll see if it's any good. The Edbutt. Breath spells are best if you can kind of cast them into an enemy flank. So what I'll do is try and keep my line nice and straight, and we'll go see if we can cast it into the flank of our enemies here. So I've got these rocks to kind of help hold up my flank, and let's get Grimgore up here. Kind of put this guy on this side. Let's hit start battle. There we go. Kind of got all my guys blobbed up here. Let's see if the vampires are going to take the bait. I have to make sure the vampires are completely tied down. And I want my line as straight as possible, so I'm going to let them just charge me. Okay, the vampires did get completely... Okay, I'm going to get my guy lined up in what I feel like is the ideal position. Actually, this is still not quite ideal. Come on, get over here. I'm thinking more like this. Okay, my guys are going to hold out long enough. This should work. Let's pause it. My guy is about to get attacked. Here's the Edbutt. So I'm going to send this screaming right up the... right through the blob of vampire in the right direction here. So let's give it a shot. You can see it actually did do heavy damage to the Cairn Wraiths and pretty much nothing to the Cryptors. So it looks like the Edbutt is going to, again, still be best suited to the Cairn Wraiths. It did 11 damage, or it killed 11 Cairn Wraiths. So it doesn't look like it's like Wind of Death, which is much more effective from that angle. And we'll talk about Wind of Death another day too. But that concludes this video. Hope you all enjoyed this. So a little bit of look into the Foot of Gork. Go have some fun. Go try it out in a multiplayer battle. See if this helps you. HeirofCarthage signing out.